That's really helpful, Sam. We've got lots of questions that have come through, so we'll fire straight into the questions, if that's okay. We'll see what comes up first on the screen in a second. Here we go. Thinking about stories, should we focus on talks that are about the pandemic or carry on with talks on the Western story, but from a pandemic angle? So I guess how much do we explicitly talk about coronavirus in our talks, or how much do we kind of think about how that's affected other things?
I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. I think we focus very specifically on the pandemic, on the COVID virus. I think it speaks to people where they are, but at the same time, I think it's a message that will date very quickly. So when the pandemic is over in, let's hope, months rather than years, then our message will sound very dated. But I think the emotional entry points will always be there. I think if we can expose to people, hey, what happened in the pandemic, expose to us our fears, our insecurities, and our shame, and maybe push at those entry points.
Absolutely. I found personally, in my experience of speaking at events, in about the first 2 months after the pandemic kind of broke out here in Europe, every talk I was giving had coronavirus in the title. Now people are sick of hearing about coronavirus, but they can't escape the fact that it's forced us to think about these other existential issues. So maybe not using the word, but we can think about the issues that it's raised in our minds, which is so helpful. Thanks for that.
Yeah,
okay, we'll go to the next.
Go on. Yeah.
No, go ahead.
I was just saying, that's really funny, but it was City Bible Forum, my employer. We put this out around March or April, and in Australia, the first curve just flattened very quickly. And we thought, oh, we're dated already. And we were sort of, you can't tell anyone this, we were sort of relieved when the second wave hit. We were like, oh, okay, we're relevant again.
Yeah, and just to say that that website, that resource is really helpful. I downloaded it when I heard you speak a couple of months ago, and read all that stuff, watched the videos. And in fact, the videos were a really good example of how to do online content, because I think they're all less than 5 minutes. So I went on thinking to myself, I haven't got time to watch this now. Watched the first one that was 3 minutes. I thought, I'll just watch the next one. And about an hour and a half later, I've watched them all. So it's a good example of how doing stuff maybe in short sound bites is a way to communicate at this time. Okay, let's have the next question. If the Western viewpoint is experiencing the fear-shame angle, do we use the same fear-shame language, or how would you make it relevant to our cultures?
Yeah, so fear-shame language is saying there's an expected... So the difference between guilt and innocence and fear and honor, and shame and honor, the best way to understand is guilt is where there's a law, but we break the law, so now we need to be declared innocent. Shame is where there's an expected standard that's set either by God, your tribe, your culture, and some way we fell short. And so we have shamed ourselves, we've shamed the tribe. So it's just as objective as guilt, but it's a different sense of objective status. It's a status of shame. And somehow God now comes and restores you and it lifts you up. So it's that Romans language, how we fall short of the glory of God. But God now gives us a status of his children, and he glorifies and honors us. And we see the apostles use it in the book of Acts. So to the church religious people who had the scriptures, they use the guilt, innocence language. They say, you know, God sent you the Messiah, but you killed him. You're guilty. You need to repent. But to the pagans who are unchurched without the scriptures, they use this sort of language. There's a God who sends you rain. He makes your crops grow, but you have not worshipped him. And so I say, when I go to high schools and I speak to kids, often when in Q&A time they say, well, what is it you Christians believe? I could come in and I'll be biblical, right and true, and I say something like, you know, you've broken one command, you've broken all the commands, you think you're a good person, but you're not, you're a sinner. And what I say is true, but you can feel their eyes rolling because they've heard it 1,000 times before. So what I come in is I use the shame honor language, and I say something like this: there's a God who loves you, who made you, but we don't worship him. We don't honor him. And so that's shame honor language. But to take it even more to where the question is going, our tribes, our culture, so not just God, our tribes, our culture, and even we ourselves have an expected standard. And so in the pandemic, we can use language like, we don't like the person we became in a pandemic. And that's actually shame honor language. Or we're not the person we want to be. And that's shame honor language. But God comes and he makes us the people he needs us to be and we want to be. And that's shame honor language.
Thanks, Sam. That is so helpful, and so helpful to think about how we can connect better when we're trying to talk about this concept of sin in a way that will connect with people well. This one says, thanks, Sam. What kind of context did you have in mind to invite unbelievers into Christian community?
Yeah, and this is revolutionary, and I think even just our small groups. And at first we think, hang on, small groups are for Christians. Like, how can we be open and vulnerable if I know my non-Christian friends are watching in? But I think Paul even says this in 1 Corinthians, the way we run our meetings is we assume the implied audience is there will be some non-believers out there. That's why Paul says, conduct yourselves in this way so that even a non-believer will say, wow, the Lord really is here. So I think even our small groups, we just start having a paradigm shift. And it just takes the person hosting right at the start, say, hey, this group is a Christian group, but it's open to people of all faiths and beliefs. And if you're not a Christian yet, just watch what we do. And, we hope for the day when you too might become a Christian. And if we're meeting on Zoom or online, we could actually, I think our non-Christian friends would feel a little bit awkward in the first 1 or 2 meetings. And we could actually ask them, why don't you just mute your camera, mute your microphone, and just watch what we do? And then if we're the friend who invited them, maybe we could have a one-to-one meeting where we debrief afterwards.
That's really helpful. And I think one of the opportunities that the current situation presents us in lots of our countries is where we are able to meet in small groups, but we can't do the big events. And actually, in a small group situation, we can experience community often a lot more than we're in a big event, and we can feel quite isolated or left out. So there is an opportunity to build community in that way. Thanks. Moving on, for a non-Christian friend who is feeling discouraged by the whole pandemic and forced lockdown, any tips on how to come alongside them?
Yeah, so the key there is to come alongside. So often we want to monologue or give them advice, but often it's not wanted advice. I think if we give them advice, we're the friend who's coping, but they're not coping. And what they just want to do is to be heard and understood. They say home is where you're understood. And if we can show them we as a Christian understand them, then they would find a home, a belonging with us and our Christian community. And there's all those key things that we get taught, like we need to display 3 levels of first of all, my counseling friends say there are 3 types of listening. The first sort of listening is where you just listen, but you're waiting for your turn to talk. So that's not what our friend wants. Second one is where we're listening, waiting for our turn to tell them why they're wrong. So that's not listening. The third one is where we listen, but we're trying to hear, understand, and feel the emotion and affirm the emotion. So as I joke with my friends, guys, it's everything we were taught in marriage counseling before we got married. You need to listen, understand, and feel. So when your wife says you're not doing the dishes, you just need to repeat her words back to her. From what I hear you saying, I'm not doing the dishes. And then you have to show you've understood. You summarize her words into your words to make sure you're not just parroting your words back at her. I understand that means I'm not doing my share of the housework. And then you got to say, oh, that must make you feel. And you just got to guess an emotion, but it's always going to be anger. Oh, that must make you feel so angry. Have I heard you correctly? And your wife go, yes, you've heard me correctly. And my wife caught me giving that advice to my guy friends, and she said, oh, if I ever catch you doing that to me, and I said, oh, from what I hear you saying. But that's really what our friend who's discouraged during the pandemic wants. We just need to be someone that they can talk to and they feel understood. We affirm their emotions, we affirm their fears.
That's very helpful. That's very helpful. From what I hear you're saying, no. Great. I think we have one more. I think this is more of a statement than a question, but this is from Sarah in Italy. The FEUER team has been doing an outstanding job inspiring us for evangelism and bringing voices from all over Europe. I think we can add, and Australia. Thank you. God goes before us, Sarah. Thanks for your encouragement, Sarah. And thanks so much, Sam, for taking time to join us today that's been really helpful. And those resources, I think, will be really helpful going on from here as well. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you so much.
Thank you.